fail fast was one thing I wanted to say. I think massive discussion that needs to be about failure culture in the UK. And I was saying to Cam, the culture of Britain is very much stay in your lane. And stay in your lane means stay in your job. Don't try and be like, I'm amazing, I'm going to do more. And then when you do and create a business and then you close it, that's why people fail quietly.
Yeah.
And we were talking about that. That's a lot of the reasons why people continue limping on with businesses, because the idea of closing and the idea of failure is so big because no one talks about it.
I'm Hattie Willis, your host, and each episode I talk to an entrepreneur, investor, or startup expert to unpack their hardest moments, biggest wins, and hard-earned advice so we can shortcut our learnings as founders together. Welcome to the Not My First Guest podcast. I'm your host, Hattie Willis, and today I'm joined by not one, but two incredible founders, and not only double trouble, but they're also a couple. So we're going to try something a little bit weird, which they're both super excited that I've asked them to do, which is I'm going to get them to introduce each other. So our first guest, Joy, is going to introduce our second guest, Cameron.
Thanks, Hattie, and thanks so much for having us on the podcast. So Cameron Orcutt is a former CPA accountant. He spent his career in New York working through some amazing firms as an accountant, and after 7 years just found that he wanted more from his life and his career. So he moved to London to do an MBA Imperial, where he found his co-founder, Sam, during a work project on entrepreneurship, and had this real burning passion to solve for first-time buyers. He saw that people in the UK couldn't afford a home, and he himself was also trying to get on the property ladder. 2020 came, pandemic came, and he was like, I'm going to put all my time and effort into that. Built this incredible business called On Ladder, where they partnered with the mortgages industry, and they were great.
I'll be doing this kind of intro from now. Okay, Cameron, time to introduce Joy.
Yeah, I'll keep it concise. How about that? So Joy Mpofu, the first part of her career, high-power career at Morgan Stanley. She did capital markets, she did sustainability, and by her 7th year, she was a VP. But she found herself wanting, there's going to be a theme of this throughout she found herself wanting more out of her career. Morgan Stanley was probably a great skill set that she picked up, but sometimes you just want to be in a more dynamic environment. So she quit her career in order to pursue a path of entrepreneurship. Started in fashion to start, doing brands for small retail stores, if I remember correctly. But then she applied to Antler, got into one of their cohorts, and paired up with a co-founder there and started a sex tech company called Flutter. She then built it up over the course of a year. She primarily spearheaded the, can I just, that's too much?
I love it.
I feel like we're both just, we're just like trying to like, I know you inside and out.
Yeah, I love that. It's like Mr. and Mrs. the company edition. I love that.
Anyway, she was venture backed, started a company, and then we'll get into it a little bit later, but one thing led to another, and for both of us, really, we left our respective startups.
And so this is kind of a weird special episode in the sense that it's maybe going to seem a little bit, sad. We're going into killing startups, right? Yeah. And I want to really understand that process for you. That's where we're going to spend the bulk of the episode, because you did both make the really hard calls to shut down your companies at different times. Yeah. And I'm so curious of the dynamic of having a partner who's shut down their company when you decided to yours, and how you support someone through that when you've been through it yourself. Before that, can I get a kind of highlights reel from each of you? You can do your own now. Because you both said, I wanted more. So you had these incredible corporate careers. But for both of you, it was like, okay, there's this itch. So what I want to understand is, was it always for entrepreneurship? Did you know you wanted to be a founder? And if yes, what was your expectation of what would it be like to be a founder versus the reality?
I didn't know I wanted to be a founder. I'll say that up front. I became a CPA and worked in New York, and I worked for KPMG on our firm Eisner Amper there. I did a little bit of audit, but mostly tax accounting for hedge funds, private equity funds. Made a great living, very comfortable, but wanted something a little bit more. And that's what I wanted to get when I went to Imperial. Kind of used the MBA as a blank slate just to explore my options. I looked at finance, I looked at consulting, I looked at joining a startup, but I did not think to start my own company.
Interesting.
Not at all. How it got to that point from this and that, there was a couple of factors. One was on the MBA, there was only 70 professionals in my class, but they are some of the most competent and just highly skilled people that I know across a bunch of different industries and different roles and all that. But a lot of them, like a pretty high percentage of the class, wanted to start their own company. So the reason I made that decision was it was a product of being surrounded by people that want to do that. There's kind of like this undertow that's subtly pulling me in this direction and making it seem more normal than it was before. So for me, there was that. I also did have an idea on the cohort where Sam and I started putting our heads together around ways to help first-time buyers. But I think the thing that turbocharged it to some extent was the pandemic. All of a sudden in, what was it, early April 2020, that was halfway through the MBA for us. It was only a year long. And, just spent a whole bunch of money on this thing going, I'm going to be well set up after this. And once it hit, there was a slow realization that, holy crap, all of the opportunities I was looking at just kind of went away. And was just left with, what do I have and what can I work on right now? Because I'm one of those people that I hate this word because it's overused, but resilient, and I'm very proactive and I like to get into it with things. So I got into it with OnLetter and Sam, and we used LinkedIn, one of the most powerful tools I know. It's a bit toxic, I think, now, but it's reached out to people we had no business talking to, whether it was former Minister of Housing that helped implement Help to Buy, became one of our advisors, co-founder Amanza, who led our first round, a dozen mortgage lenders, brokers, obviously loads of first-time buyers, and we just took it from there. Yeah.
Can I ask a really practical question? I get asked this all the time. How do I reach out to people who I want as advisors, but like you've got that feeling you had of, we have no right to be talking to you, I think is what every founder is feeling.
Yeah.
What did you say to them roughly? I appreciate it was a few years ago, but what was the message to the head of housing, ex-head of Help to Buy?
What you have to do is just say that for him, he's invested in the housing sector. Like you go on his LinkedIn, you see, yes, Minister of Housing, but he's on the board of a social housing thing. He's advisor for this company. He's whatever. And it all is around housing and how to help make it better. So I think what I went with was just, hey, we're drifting into this space. We want to build a product to help solve this problem. We know that you kind of worked on this when you were in government. We're looking for advice. We're looking for feedback on what we need to do in order to make this work. If you have time for a chat, please pop on the call.
I think there's so much in that. I think founders overcomplicate this and they feel like they have to outline the solution. And I think it's so much easier to go in at the stage you went in and be like, hey, I'm interested in this problem, which you seem really invested in. Can I have some advice? I think is a much easier ask than, hey, here's my MVP, try it, give me some feedback. No.
I think startups die in darkness. There's a lot of people that put stealth on their things, and it just kills me. Do you know how astronomically low the chances are that someone actually takes your idea and runs with it? How much you don't understand. It's a first-time founder thing, because most second-time founders, they will realize just how brutal it is to start a company.
Yeah.
No one wants a piece of that for the most part, except the crazy people like us that do it.
And also, if someone is genuinely going to be able to out-execute you at pace to the point where they win, then I want to know that earlier, because they're still going to out-execute me later. If they're that much faster than me, that you can take my idea and you can deliver it better than I can, that's a painful lesson, but I would like to move it earlier so I can have a chance to do the next thing, right?
Or you just identify them and go, do you want to work together?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
No, I agree. The stealth thing is a real bugbear of mine. Okay. So I love this, and I think a lot of founders will relate to this sense of, I'm just getting stuck in. I don't quite know what it's going to be yet, but I have an idea in this space. Let's stick with OnLetter for a little bit. You start building up these advisors. You mentioned you get your first round of funding with Monzo founder leading it.
Yeah. So the Imperial MBA was quite good because I didn't really know a lot about entrepreneurship and how to approach it before. Some of the platitudes that come out of entrepreneurship were very much in our minds when we started. So things like talk to customers, get a feel for the problem first. What's the market size? Do we have the right skill set as a team? And then go from there. So really it was digging into the problem and understanding it. So for that, it is talking to customers, but it's also talking to experts in the field. And because housing, it's so fragmented and there's so many different stakeholders, you need to talk to all of them. to get a feel for things.
So I don't know if I told you this when we met, talking of stealth and stealing ideas. We actually I'm about to out the studio I worked in. We actually looked at On Ladder and we're like, this is kind of cool. Maybe we should do something similar. And we looked into the space, and exactly as you said, we talked to a load of would-be first-time buyers, and the answer was very quickly like, yes, everyone has the pain. This is not risky.
Yeah.
But how do you solve it systemically? Really freaking complicated. And that's where I think founders get confused by the area of talk to your customers. I think it should be talk to your stakeholders, right?
That's definitely needs to be a part of it. Yeah. So for us, I think we looked at some of the competition and we realized that they had fallen flat with getting some stakeholders on board. So one of the things we really wanted to do was talk to brokers who handle 90-ish% of all distribution. If you're a first-time buyer, 9 times out of 10, you're going to go to a broker and talk to them about it. So it's weird. It's a B2B2C model. Yes, you want to talk to the customer, but you also want to talk to the stakeholder that's selling your product to them, because they'll have insights about the customer that maybe the customer doesn't even realize.
So you're doing a lot with, and assuming mortgage brokers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Curious, how much did you raise in your first round, and how easy was that first raise?
So we raised $275,000 pre-seed. We raised the round the same month of the first base rate hike. Yeah, so
those of you not watching the video, my face just went, ooh.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah.
So yeah, we raised the round, and the idea was to use it to essentially get to a pilot, get through the FCA, get our initial stakeholders on board.
And just tell us quickly at this stage, what is the idea? What is the business model? Clearly, the space is around helping first-time buyers, but what are you trying to pilot?
The easiest way to explain the problem is price to income to buy a home in the UK is 9 times income. Just let that simmer for a second.
I think I know the stat you're giving me next.
Yeah, and mortgage lenders are soft capped at providing 4.5 times income mortgages, but mortgage lenders, they can only do 15% of new lending above 4.5 times. So there's a hard cap on it. But basically, that's the problem. So the way we wanted to do it was pair a second charge mortgage alongside the first charge. So 4.5, provide a second charge that gets them up to 6, say, depending on affordability and underwriting criteria. It's not going to solve all their problems. You're a couple years out of college and suddenly, I can buy a home. Yeah. But it makes it a little bit easier. Quite a bit easier, especially for certain people that are at a stage where they need it. The average age for first-time buyers is, I want to say 34, 35 now. That's the age you've already had your first kid, maybe, most likely, and you need a home. And
too.
Yeah, sorry, it's just
no, but it's true, and I'm seeing so many friends at that exact age, literally in the space of a year, be like, I'm gonna get married and have kids and buy a house, and this money is coming from where?
Yeah. So the business model was mortgage lender, fintech lender, provide a flexible finance to first-time buyers to get them on the ladder faster. So low payments as you go along, with charges rolling into the loan are paid when you go to sell and when you go to remortgage the loan. That was the model. That was what we raised off of. We raised off of pitch deck, basically, although we had some really encouraging conversations with people and potential partners by that point, but really mostly a pitch deck. And we basically just used it to get the initial partners in place. So 10 million in debt for the loans themselves. Yeah. So 200 loans effectively for a pilot. It helped us with branding to get our name out there to brokers, to get heads of terms from certain brokerage firms, head of terms from a mortgage lender to do it alongside them. And we basically had all our strategic partners in place to be able to conduct a pilot. But I kind of hinted at this before, but we ran into a problem where interest rates have risen by 1,000% by the time we were looking to get through the FCA process. And they were looking for 3 years of equity funding. So equity became effectively impossible to raise during that time unless you were probably a well-established startup or growth company at that point. Yeah. And even then it was probably hard. So we were pre-revenue, pre-FCA, and we were looking to raise 1.3 million. And that proved to be extraordinarily hard. I got halfway through the round. I beat my head against the wall for about 6 months. And I got to say, it was probably one of the more challenging times in my life because you get to that point where you have everything set up and ready to go. And then there's this one thing that is preventing you from getting across the line. So I think after 6 months, just decided to try to pivot. The pivot didn't really work, obviously. Started having conversations late last year saying that things were not working out. And I think even that aspect of it was quite hard, just because we mentioned the Munzo person, but there were other people on the cap table, a friend, my parents. And I think whenever I talked to them, I was just like, do not put in anything that you're not willing to lose. But it doesn't matter because you feel like they put in equity, they made an investment with the idea that they would get 100x return or something. But you still have that feeling of you owe them something because you got yourself off the ground, but they were there to give you a push. So you want to do your best for them to the extent possible. But, at a certain point, you just have to allow yourself to admit that it's not working. And I have to, at some point, take care of myself from a stress perspective, a financial perspective. We had run out, I think by the time I started having conversations, we had already run out of money like 6 months before. So you can do the math on that.
I want to pick up because I think there's going to be a ton of shared threads / comparisons that would be really interesting throughout. So let's get up to speed on Flutter and your journey, Joy. And then let's start diving into, as you said, what's the difference that having different types of investors make? I think that point around family and friends, something I spend a lot of time talking to founders about. It does carry disproportionate weight. And equally, having more senior investors on can carry a different kind of weight. So, Joy, let's pick up Flutter. You obviously went on to Antler, which is a venture builder program, which some people have likened to Love Island for finding co-founders.
Yeah.
We were
Just as toxic.
I'm going to make no comment about what I've heard from founders. I think there are some really cool things about Antler. I think there are some things that founders maybe do need to be aware of. But curious for you, the process of finding out the idea for Flutter as well, and then what happens with the startup.
Yeah, sure. I'll go back just a year before of like why I made the jump. For me, I loved working in banking. I loved Morgan Stanley. I met some incredible people. The caliber of people you meet are so smart and just the best. And I just developed this incredible skill set. But I always had this huge creative outlet. And for me, I would do a lot of diversity work. And that was where I got to, I guess, pursue my creative outlet, doing events, running programs. And when I made VP, I really had this deep sense. I was like, wow, I made VP in something that I'm not as passionate about. I really enjoyed it, but it's not who I am.
Yeah.
And I don't have any kids. I'm not married. And I'm just going to go on this adventure of finding out who I am, who is Joy authentically. And I give that insight because it's really important on why I landed where I am now. But anyway, I did some fashion work at the beginning. I love style. And I wanted to see what was my creative skill set outside of banking. What did I enjoy doing? Really test who am I outside of this constraint of investment banking. And I ended up joining Antler because it's a really lonely journey being a founder. And also people are saying, build VC backable businesses. What does that mean? I was doing this styling thing and then it wasn't VC backable. And I'm like, oh, it's not big enough. We can really delve into that. I need to be building something that's great and amazing. And I'd heard about Antler. I had friends who'd left banking and also gone through similar programs. So I thought it'd be a great opportunity. I also found it really lonely, as I said, to find a co-founder. And you get paid. I'm not going to lie, like having $4,000 when you're not earning a salary. I did have savings, but it was like, here's 3 months to be paid.
Step out.
Exactly. Yeah. Antler is Love Island meets Dragon's Den meets Apprentice. I think it's a great experience going from corporate to this really safe space in the sense of you're experimenting and you're not having to look for a job and you're only proving it to the people there. And again, you're with like-minded people. When in your life are you ever going to meet founders all at the same point in their life? They've quit their career, they've taken this risk, they believe in what they want to build. It's very rare that you meet people like that. So that was really cool to meet a whole group of people going through the same experience. And you can then build your own network, I guess. I always quit my job knowing I wanted to build something focused on women. I love women. I'm really passionate about female empowerment. But when I joined Antler, I thought that was maybe a bit too niche.
50% of the population. It's just too
No, I know. But it's so true. But in terms of I want to build a female-focused business, not many people do. And sadly, the demographic is 70 people and only 12 women. Right?
What? I don't think I knew that.
Yeah, it's very low percentage.
Oh my God, yeah.
So then I had a sustainability background and I very much put myself forward as someone who wants to do fashion sustainability because I am fashion. I have a sustainability background. And what I loved about Antler is I got to fail fast. I tested out a sustainability business and realized people don't really care about sustainability. I'm going to say it. Businesses don't, and they'll only start caring about it if regulation comes in. So there wasn't really a space to create something that could grow. And then I had an ideation day around womanhood, where I put different categories of womanhood, whether it's health, dating, sex. I'd come out of a 7-year relationship recently, and I was like, how do you navigate being single in your 30s? Under sex, again, had gone through this whole rediscovery of we never talk about pleasure, we never talk about sex, we don't know our bodies when it comes to that. And in that moment, I had this come to Jesus moment, like, oh my gosh, I was born to solve for this. I'm so passionate. And I'm one of those people who's really driven by intuition. I've moved around a lot as a child and really connect with people. And I'm like, if I feel this way, I have a deep sense other women feel this way. And I didn't have a co-founder at the time. So I said to myself, I'll give myself a week to look at the data, speak to as many women as possible and see if this really is a thing. And within a week, I sent out an anonymous survey and 115 women came back. And in the survey, it was questions that as women, we've never been asked before. What is your relationship with sex? When you've had positive experiences, who do you talk to? When you've had negative experiences, who do you talk to? Where do you get information from? What are your thoughts on pleasure? And people, because it was anonymous, wrote back incredible responses that validated what I thought. I then had some user interviews, and I also was like, I don't feel capable to be doing this, because it felt like therapy, asking who's given birth, their relationship with their bodies, their relationship with sex, and people have never been asked these questions. So it was like, wow, this is huge. And then I found this research paper by this psychosexual therapist called Laurie Mintz, and it outlined women's relationship with pleasure. And reading the research paper, I felt so validated in everything I had thought and heard from other women. And I wrote her a cold email like, wow, I love what you're doing. I'm thinking of building a business in this space. Can we chat? And she came back. So meanwhile, I'm in this process in Antler. Antler, basically, you have to form a team to get investment. And you form a team, you get a coach, and you have to pitch every Friday on your progress. But if you don't have a team, you don't pitch and you don't get a coach. So you're basically like a leper, honestly. So I was like, I've come up with this idea. It's amazing. I know I'm super passionate about it. I'll do it regardless if I get funding or not, but with the hope of always finding someone to join me so I could get investment. So I ended up meeting my co-founder maybe a week and a half later towards the end of the program, and thought we were a great fit on paper, and she was very passionate about the space as well. We ended up being invited to investment committee and getting funding for Flutter, which was super exciting, and started that journey in May to build this incredible business, because the data is 50% of women in Britain suffer from sexual problems, from low libido, painful sex, and difficulty climaxing. And that number's probably even higher because how many people even talk about it. So it ticked all the boxes for a VC backable business, and we had a great founder market fit as well. And it was just really going on this journey to build a brand and build a product that women would love and resonate with.
And I'm curious about that, because you and I have had a lot of discussions since then. I think this is one of the challenges I do have with Antler, is that investment is a strategy. Investability is from day one the benchmark of like, is it successful? Is it investable by VCs? I think one of the challenges you then hit with Flutter is, yes, the market's huge, it's a massive pain, we're ticking the scalability, but a lot of VCs don't have still an open policy when it comes to sex tech. And can you just unpack that a little bit for our listeners? Because I think some will be quite surprised by approaches still. If you haven't already, go back as well and listen to Farah Kabir's episode on Hanks. Super eye-opening, not in the way you want your eyes to be opened, about some of the prejudice she faced trying to create this sustainable, ethical condom company, which now does much more than condoms. But anyway, can you share some of your experience on that side of the openness of the investor market to sex tech?
Yeah. Oh, I don't know. It's such an interesting question. I love Farah. I actually listened to the episode last year when you told me. I love that she was also ex-banking, also a woman of color going into the sex space. I was super inspired by her journey. I think there was something that you said very early on when we met was more about, do you need VC funding? I think that's something more to talk about. I actually had a really great experience, I have to say, when talking to most investors. One of my biggest skill sets is definitely, I took a very taboo subject and made it accessible to people, whether that was on LinkedIn, whether it was in conversations, and whether that was on Instagram. So what people struggled with was the product as well. Are people going to pay for this?
Yeah.
And are there enough people who want to pay for it? So if you don't have that traction that people are paying for your product, it's very hard to see whether the investors are saying no because of that or because it's sex tech.
Yeah.
I obviously did have some investors who were like, I cannot invest in sex tech for sure. For me, what was really challenging was we'd apply to maybe female founder specific investors where they say we're agnostic, and then you'd apply and have really great traction and they'll say we don't do sex. And these are women saying that. That frustrated me a lot. People's narrow-mindedness on what sex is.
It's a massive hang-up. And for anyone who doesn't know, basically like VC started having these morality clauses, which were originally intended so you don't just invest all your money in pornography. Fine, fair enough. And you and I had a lot of debate between us, but it's a health proposition. I was like, yes, it is, but they're gonna cut it off as in their head it's pure sex. And it's like, no, it's actually this health well-being proposition. Cameron.
But it's also, you've mentioned this to me before, but there's also a systemic problem where it's not necessarily the funds, like the people that you're talking with, but it's the people that sit behind them. There are certain LPs that are really prominent anchor investors for a lot of these funds that they have rules around this.
100%.
Yeah.
No, 100%. Both of you reminded me because I've gone through a closure. I've forgotten so many things. Like, nope, no issues. But you're right. Actually, two things that you've both reminded me is firstly, when I was getting ready for fundraising, the narrative change. It's a huge push for us to change our narrative to be women's health and remove the word sex, which it is. Sexual health is women's health, but at the same time, it is also sex. So there was always a narrative from investor advisors where if you're not going to be able to raise if your pitch is about sex, people don't really care about the impact of sex just because people are having a bad sex life. What does that mean?
I'd also argue,
people
do care.
They do.
Only if it affects one side of the gender. But anyway, let's not get started there.
No,
because there's a big care if it's affecting men. I'm just going to put it out there. There is a huge funding for libido products for men. Huge.
Massive.
And there's also Him's massive success story, which should be. It's amazing. But there is very one-sided care about this equation.
No, it's so true. We had an investor once say, because we had 50% of women, and then we spoke to over 400 women, and it was like 75% of women then left feeling broken, depressed. And they're like, what does depressed mean? Like, how do you quantify that? So for 100%, there's all the trauma things you push back down. But that was definitely true. Like, how do you change the narrative to be more palatable because people feel uncomfortable with sex? And then to Cameron's point of view, there were some people who were looking to raise a fund themselves. And they're like, oh, if we invest in you, we've got this big institutional investor who wouldn't invest. And for me, I did actually cry to Cameron because I was like, wow, the barriers that exist for women behind closed doors in terms of just us progressing are so ingrained, right? So the fact that I can't get investment or another female-owned women's brand around sex can't get investment because of a conservative institutional investor who invests in so many. So that means that whole market will never grow. Not
to get it too off track, but the recent Innovate UK, the women's funding. Do you have thoughts? Do you guys have thoughts?
He's talked loads.
There are so many systemic issues behind funding, and what Cameron's referencing is, for anyone who missed it, there is a UK Innovate UK grant which was advertised as a 4 million pot. It was advertised that it would go to 50 founders. It then, in the awards, they said it's going to up to 25 founders. And by the way, because some people ask me, the grant is a set amount. So it's not that they just gave the 4 million, but to fewer people. The grant is £75,000. And so there was a big fuss kicked up, quite rightly, and Innovate UK have overturned the decision. But it is one of these issues. It was overturned yesterday, and I took until today to post about it because I was really struggling to celebrate it, because I was like, okay, I'm really happy it's been overturned, but what a waste of our energy to have to overturn this. And to your point, the fact that we're fighting for a grant pot that was allocated to women, and wording was changed on the website apparently to go from 450 women to up to 50 to match this change in strategy. So a lot needs to shift in this space. And I think it's just frustrating because wherever you turn as a female founder, you hit boundaries, right? And I think particularly as a female founder solving issues for women, I remember Farah saying in her episode, what do women know about condoms? And it's like, probably a bit, I would argue, maybe often on the receiving end of one.
No, it's so true. Our investor was a man, and a lot of the investors that you meet are men. I think it's, for me, listen, I'm a Black woman who worked in investment banking. I've navigated being in spaces that people don't look like me. So I think I don't necessarily look at the situation always that way, because when we started Flutter, oh my gosh, the amount of people who've consistently said to me, you're a Black female doing a taboo business, that's going to be super hard for you. That was all the advice I got. And it's not very helpful advice. Those things are facts. Like, they're not going to stop me from working in the space. So I think I always try and look at the lens of how do you bring people on board and get them to understand the problem. And the data spoke for itself. I spoke to so many women. The data online spoke for itself. So people couldn't disagree with that. We always used to say, well, find the investors who get it. And I think that's regardless of what business you're building, you have to find the people who get what you're trying to build and why the problem exists. The sex tech space itself is so under-innovated, right? You have Cindy Gallop, who's been championing the space for decades, and there hasn't really been many innovators. It's incredible to see what Hanks are doing or what SheSpot are doing, but even them, they're not really tech companies, and that's a whole nother conversation.
And Farah was very honest about VC being kind of out for them as a path for lots of reasons.
No, exactly. And as we say, VC is not the only route to grow a business, and I definitely have a lot of comments on that going forward.
Yeah. And there's so much we could dive into. Where I land on this, and this might not be where I end up on it, but currently my stake on it is you never want to encourage a founder to be less ambitious just because the space is broken, because otherwise it'll never change, right? If we don't have more women getting VC funding, the stat will always be 2%. But equally, I do think knowledge is a little bit of power, in the sense of if you're going up against it and you're hitting a brick wall, you do want to know it's a brick wall and it's not you, right? And I think there's a balance of, hey, what can I learn from this? Like, maybe there is some feedback that they're giving that's constructive, but maybe, to Cameron's point, there are LPs in this fund who are just saying, don't invest in these spaces. You want to know that so you're not keeping chasing it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get into some pair questions. So, Joy, you just set us up brilliantly. Let's talk about VC funding. Now you've been through that journey of trying to get VC funding, who do you think it is and isn't right for? Joy, kick us off.
I always reflect on when I first met Hattie, because Hattie was like, that's what If We Raise is all about. And I think it's a systemic issue more on LinkedIn, TechCrunch, all of this. So as people wanting to be founders, the barometer of success is how much you've raised rather than the business that you're building or the impact you're having on customers, right? So for me, that's my own reflection. I think some businesses really do need VC funding. B2B SaaS makes sense.
Yeah.
D2C, I think for me, I would do it again very differently. I would bootstrap the business and really spend time building a product that customers love, and then getting income that way and revenue that way, and then use VC funding if you need to scale at like Series A stage, not at the beginning. It doesn't make sense to me to do VC funding pre-product market fit, because then you're trying to fix things before you have to raise again, and you don't have time to actually figure out if what you're building is needed or is correct, right? So I think there needs to be more discussion. I think the narrative is so negative. It's like, it's okay to be a bootstrap business. So of course, then people are like, oh, I don't want to be. Do you know what I mean? The way.
Don't be embarrassed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so the narrative is so bad. That's why everyone wants to get funding. And then if you ask founders, do you really need the cash? A lot of the time they don't, you know?
But they think it'll solve all the problems. So the amount of founders I speak to who are like, oh, but if we just raise, it gets easier. I'm like, oh, it gets a lot harder if you raise. You have a lot of people over your shoulder expecting huge things if you've taken institutional capital, quite big things if you take an angel investment.
No, 100%.
I don't know. On the VC front, what I would highlight is the complexities that come along with getting VC capital. With angels, it's a little bit different. VCs talk about how they can be very helpful to you, but whether or not they can is like an open question. And it's not something I can necessarily comment on.
But I think some can.
Yeah. But going out there and finding angels that have industry-specific ways in which they can help with connections, additional capital maybe, if it's needed. But I think at the earliest of stages, that's where you want to be.
Yeah.
Definitely angel syndicates. Go for some of these accelerators possibly. We didn't do that, but yeah. With regards to the VC side, make no mistake, these guys are the big boys, and they're there to make money for LPs. And there are terms and conditions that are going to come along that maybe make it harder for you to do the things that you need to do to get the business going. So starting with angels, yes, maybe you get some investment in this. You need the investment in some cases. Depends on the company, but it's going to be more flexible and it's going to be more malleable. And the understanding is there that things will have to change dramatically, possibly, in order to get it across the line. With VCs, you want them maybe seed, but then Series A, probably. After you've done a lot of the hard work, really. You want to have expertise come along with the money at the early stage, which might not be the case with a VC.
And I do also think a lot of VCs are looking for so much more traction than they used to be.
Yeah.
That equally, there's a lot of time wasted going and trying to get VC money when they're not going to give it to you because you're not an exited founder.
Being a founder and having come from investment banking, there's such a snobbery within the VC space because it's mainly bankers or consultancy people going into VC who have never been founders. And then you have people asking you questions. And because of the ecosystem has created this hype of getting VC funding, then VCs have a lot more power than they need to be. There isn't a partnership between a VC and a founder to build an incredible business. It's like, we're a VC and you're a founder, we know better. But a lot of the time, they've never built anything from scratch. They've never scaled anything, right? So I think there needs to be more collaboration probably between founders and VCs rather than it being such separate experiences and then very negative experiences on both sides.
The thing I would add on to that is just we need more VCs who used to be founders.
For sure.
Some VCs are just ex-founders and some VCs are just ex-investment bankers. And maybe a mix is what.
Yeah, right.
That's true. Exactly. You always need a mix. But yeah.
Okay. Time flies when there's two of you. Time flies when there's one person. I don't know why I'm pretending. I'm brilliant at time management. I want to get into the process of deciding to shut down the companies. And I'm also curious, because I think a lot of the time we talk about the roles that friends and family and romantic partners play in those decisions.
What could you be referring to?
I mean, you guys gave me full disclosure. I really want to get into because I just think it's so powerful. Normally you'll have a personal podcast saying, I decided to shut down. My partner was incredibly supportive, but we actually have your partners in the room to actually be able to share what was the process like of deciding to shut down. And I'm curious from each of you what you observed that the other needed a bit of help and support with, because I do think for founders going through this, even if your partner isn't a founder, get your partner to listen, to have a bit of empathy, but also just to understand, because I think so many founders I speak to just don't know when to call it a day and how to go through that process without losing all of your sense of self-worth and identity. Because I think we get so tied to my identity as a founder.
Yeah. I think what I would start with is the fact that if you're a startup founder, there's really not a lot of people that you can actually talk about the real shit with when it comes to starting a company. You have your personal board of directors, your personal stakeholders, whatever you want to call it. So you have parents, you got siblings, you have partners, you have investors, you have advisors, you have employees or co-founders. Because of the incentives involved, you're there to paint the best picture constantly of what you're doing. So when things start to, say, trend in the wrong direction, you're programmed to do that.
Yeah.
And that is just your baseline. And some might look at it as denial, but it's habit. For me, by the time it started to look like, yeah, it's probably time to close it up, I was fighting a habit that had been developed over years. So acknowledging that it is getting close to closing time, it's not easy by any means. And it's really closely aligns with the feeling of burnout is you go into meetings where you're not as energetic as you used to be. Or you start getting asked tough questions. There's just this feeling of friction and like you're walking in quicksand and it starts to get really tough. That's when I guess the advice I would have is just acknowledge that you're in quicksand.
Yeah.
That moment when you decide that it's time to close up, it's different for every business, for every person. Every situation is a little bit different, but I think start to think about possibly this might be the right time is when you start to feel that heaviness or that things are not moving as quickly as it used to or as lightly as it used to. Start to notice when that happens. For me, we started to pivot really right around the time when I met Joy. So by that point, I still hadn't experienced a lot of the quicksand, but as the summer went along, as interest rates continued to be as high as they were, it just looked like this is not getting better.
Is that hard? If you're newly dating someone, and I feel like at the beginning when you're dating someone, you're definitely trying to impress them, right? Like, I want you to think I'm smart. I want you to think I'm capable. Was it hard being in a new relationship and also being like, hey, things aren't going great for me career-wise?
So this is where I think the first few months, at least, up until the autumn, I hadn't started to acknowledge that things were not really going as well. The decision to pivot had already happened and things like that, but really acknowledging that this is not working hadn't really kicked in. So from things started with Joy's standpoint, starting to date her, It was like, yeah, it was all great. I wouldn't say it was all great. We definitely had some conversations by that point, just like this is happening and all that. But it wasn't in the sense of this dread of, God damn, we're about to close or something. It was more of a, this is frustrating and these are the things that I'm doing in order to address them, and let's see how it plays out. Yeah.
And Joy, from your side, was there a moment you were like, I'm going to shut down Flutter? Was it a process?
It's fascinating because we met over a year ago when I was just starting Flutter. And I was so thankful because, as I said, it's so lonely, particularly coming from corporate where most of your friends, your family are all in that space. So it was amazing to meet Cam and have someone to navigate the co-founder dynamic and just building a company together and not feel so alone. So like meeting another CEO who's building a business, that was really crazy. And it was so intense because you're both founders trying to build and make a business work. So already it started off being intense, but I think we provided a really great space to just be ourselves outside of the business and understand how tough that was. And for me, I made the decision to leave Flutter in May. And I've had a lot of time to reflect on the journey. I'm someone who's super introspective of like, why do I make decisions? What can I learn from the mistakes that I've made? And I said to you, I quit my banking career because I wanted to discover who I was, like the authentic me. And when I came up with this idea, it felt so real and natural. But then what then jumped into force was winning. Like leaving banking, I think everyone has that pressure. Whenever you quit a really great job, there's such a pressure to succeed. Everyone's, oh, you quit this big bank, you're successful. And I thought I'd let go of that pressure, but it was ingrained. So for me, it's like, I need to get investment. What do I need to get investment? I need to get a co-founder. I need to get this investment. So I ended up a year on and wow, what I've built is so far from what I envisioned. And I don't feel like myself at all. So it was a really personal decision and a really personal journey. If I quit my career to find me, and now I'm feeling exactly the same as when I quit my banking career.
Yeah.
My health had deteriorated. I was constantly sick. My cortisol levels were terrible. Just really not feeling like myself. But then you start a business and everyone's like, entrepreneurship's hard. So I'm like, I'm sick because I'm meant to be sick. But actually, your body's giving you signs. If you're constantly sick, you are not doing the right thing.
That really resonates because I've been ill so much in the last year. I've been doing this wrong. And I do think there's a big thing with founders. And when you said it, you really helpfully foreshadowed that you were going to come back to this idea of being your authentic self. And I think for founders, it's so easy to bit by bit lose track of why you started in. And there's a really interesting book called Company of One, which has a lot of the thesis is like what we end up doing is getting on this train of have to grow the company. And that becomes the goal rather than the actual reasons you started the business. Right? And actually, for lots of people, growing the company isn't what success looks like. And I think founders need to come back a lot more to like, why do I actually want to be doing this? What do I want my life to look like? If actually you want to grow it to a huge scale, that's super exciting to you. You've got all the energy for it. That growth journey is part of the excitement and you need the scale for it to work. Great. VC might be a great path to go down. I've spent the last 2 years with If We Raise telling founders you can choose your path. You don't have to go on this high stress path. And then I'm guilty of absorbing like, I need to grow both businesses. Guess what? It needs to be bigger. If We Raise needs to be bigger. And then semi-burning myself out in the process because I'm going, and actually I've really sat back and been like, what do I need them to deliver? I've set myself like a target. What do I want to earn from this? And an impact target. And I think that's would be helpful for founders to come back to is what is actually enough? And maybe it is the journey, big growth, but maybe it's a smaller thing along the way.
Yeah. No, it was so many things to say because you asked a question more about the relationship side. And what was fascinating is obviously you were going through this development of trying to decide what you want to do with the business. But you just started dating. So that's like, what, December? And then I'm seeing Cameron going through this. I was like, oh, my business is going well. I remember.
It wasn't good.
But I was like, my business is going well. Like, sucks to be you, kind of. But like, you were then,
I was so supportive of you, John.
Yeah, I was very supportive. But it was just interesting because it was like, oh, wow, it does make sense for him to close. But then I was still in denial of myself and where I was. So it was interesting watching you go through that. I never thought that I would then be going through it in a few months after.
Yeah. I caught up with one of our advisors a couple of months ago and she looked at me and she was just like, you look way better than last year. It wasn't in like a sarcastic way. I have a really good relationship with her and she was great during the whole thing. But she basically just said, you look like you had PTSD last year. And I think looking back, I 100% agree with her. when you're low at that end, you're definitely low.
The problem as well is it's so gradual that
It sneaks up on you. This is the thing for any of this stuff. There's literally no guidebook. People are trying to make a guidebook out of starting a company, but ultimately there are some things that you should remember as you're doing it, but ultimately everything's a little bit different. There's no guidebook to growing it. Everything is a little bit different for each company, and definitely closing. There's no roadmap to that.
I want to ask about the process of shutting down a company, because I think people often are like, how does that even work if I were to do it? How did you go about that? Did you get help to do it? What was surprising and hard in that process of actually being like, right, this is over?
I think it's recognizing when it's over. I will say this again and again. Everything is a little bit different, so don't take this as gospel, what I say. But for us, we had run out of money and was without money for about 6 months. So that was a pretty big sign. There was also, we hadn't really moved with the pivot. We had gotten some partners in place for the pivot, but it hadn't really gone the way we wanted or as fast as we wanted or as I needed, I guess, from a financial stability standpoint. So at a certain point, you just have to say, what are we doing here? And is this really working? And just be honest, really. So I think it's the recognition part that is challenging sometimes.
One thing I've definitely observed in founders, slightly worried someone's going to listen and be like, you talk about me, but this is multiple founders that I've seen, is when there is just about enough money to keep going, it's knowing when to call it quits, right? We're never making enough to be financially comfortable. We're making huge personal sacrifices. This isn't fitting our life stage, whatever. But it's like, but the business is still profitable, just not enough to actually pay the salaries we need. And then it's so hard because there's always like another...
You get well practiced at recognizing maybe there's this other thing that I can do in order to make it move forward. So it's really the recognition piece. And then from there, the difficult part is notifying people. Really. The admin stuff is the admin stuff. But really, for me, it was the stakeholder stuff and people that I really either I'm quite close to or people that had really helped us get going in the beginning, just saying, it's not working out. We have to close. And each of those conversations is different. So for me, I had to talk to probably 18 different people and have the same conversation each time. And that in of itself is a brutal experience.
I think that will never not be emotionally exhausting. But I think also founders, in that time, you can't know that those people will probably back you again. So you're thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm letting them down and they're never going to trust me again. The amount of founders we see who are second, third time founders who have investors that backed them the first time and they failed is huge.
It goes back to what I was just talking about, is that founders will always look for, but there's a different way we could do it and all that. So I actually was trying to do that at the beginning of this year. I was doing a little fractional CFO work and then also doing something along the side and trying to build in, had ahead of terms from a bank and all that. So had an unfortunate meeting with BFCA, which didn't go the way we wanted. So at that point, I just stopped and I think I messaged the lead about it. And he was just like, basically something along the lines of, you'll do it again. There will be another time. It just made me feel good. It's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but I just felt supported and good about it, that I'll just go and get a regular job and then I'll come back later.
And I actually think often what I hear from founders is that the worst happens and you've built it up in your head so much, and then the worst is, I'll go and get another job, which is not what you want. I don't want to minimize that. And it's another kind of heartbreak to have to shut something down, but that is the worst case scenario. You do go and get a job. I do think we need to remember that, as you say, you can go and get another job, you can go again. And this will not, long term, with people who are great in the space, count against you.
Fail fast was one thing I wanted to say. I think massive discussion that needs to be about failure culture in the UK. And I was saying to Cam, the culture of Britain is very much stay in your lane. And stay in your lane means stay in your job. Don't try and be like, I'm amazing, I'm going to do more. And then when you do and create a business and then you close it, that's why people fail quietly. And we were talking about that. That's a lot of the reasons why people continue limping on with businesses, because the idea of closing and the idea of failure is so big because no one talks about it. And then for us going through it, it was, for me personally, I'm like, wow, this is such an extreme experience and no one talks about it. And it was really great to have someone there who was going through the same experience. It's like the most intense experience you can ever go through closing a business. But then I wasn't alone, because if I was alone, it would have been even more challenging. And to your point about going back to work, if you're a founder, your whole identity is being a founder. Your sense of purpose is your business. And you picture yourself doing that for the next 5 to 10 years. And all of a sudden, you're closing your business and you don't know who you are. So I definitely struggled because I made the decision to leave and close Flutter. And I felt relieved. And I was like, this is the right decision.
I remember you texting and saying,
Yeah,
I overwhelmingly feel relieved.
exactly. But then what caught me off guard was the grief that followed because I wasn't expecting that. I was like, I made this decision. It was right for me. And then I find myself feeling depressed, burnt out, and unsure which direction to go. And I guess it's also ego because my parents are like, just get a job. And I'm like, I thought I left back then. Yeah, exactly.
Such a complicated question or to answer. It's what job should I go after? Because the founder job is so diverse that no one knows how to bucket you.
Exactly.
Recruiters don't care about you because you're not an easy sell. Yeah.
And also, I feel like Cameron, you'd at least gone from accounting to fintech. Joy, you were like
banking to
fashion to sex tech. Like, okay, where do we put you now? Like, okay, 2 final questions for each of you. I'm going to come to Joy first. First question is, and Cameron, you're getting the same question, so you can think about yours while Joy thinks. I don't know if you're going to be happy I came to you first or not, Joy. First question is, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received? And the second question is, what is the thing that you're proudest of?
Okay. Best piece of advice, I've said this since I was like 27, is never be limited by other people's limited imaginations. Yeah, sky's the limit and do you. So that's for me and what I've always lived by. And then most thing I'm proud of, I really am so proud of the brand that we created with Flutter, to be able to go on LinkedIn and say sex, orgasms, clitoris, and have this incredible conversation and open up the conversation with men and women across different backgrounds in a way that was so beautiful. For me, that was incredible.
And I think this is the thing that we spent a lot of time talking about, the kind of end, but you had some huge successes along the way as well. And it is remarkable what you achieved. Even I think it was the right call for you at the end, having spoken to you. But I feel like we are so quick to be like, that was the end, and not actually, wow, look at what you achieved along the way. It's exceptional.
And just sorry, on that, I think that's so true because I was saying to Cam, as we close businesses, you lose your confidence a lot.
Yeah.
And you have to remember when you start a business, you back yourself 100% because you're like, I'm a fucking incredible individual. So it's remembering that, as you said, remembering the highlights, even if it closed, you still did that. So yeah, I totally agree.
And a really good exercise for this is get a founder friend to sit with you and write a bio as if you're going to speak at a conference.
Oh, amazing.
Because no one wants to sit and write their own bio. But if a founder friend sits with you and goes, hey, no, you've done more than that. Hey, what about this? It's a good process.
She was doing that earlier today.
For you? Or for me?
No, for yourself. You were talking about it earlier today, and she was just like, this is taking so long. It's hard. It's hard to do that.
Do with a friend, 100%. I have a wonderful friend who helped me do mine. She was like, you're missing like 5 things you do. Fundamental, like you haven't mentioned the podcast. I was like, oh yeah, should I mention it? Okay, let's go back to basics. Okay, Cameron, 2 questions for you. Best piece of advice you've ever received and proudest moment.
Honestly, I think it's shout about it.
Oh, nice. Could link into Joy's comment?
No, honestly, it was from our lead. My background was as a public accountant, and inherently I just didn't come from a branding marketing background. So the idea of we raised around or we got like a partnership or something, and it was just like, why would I shout about this just yet? We haven't. Yeah. So everything deserves to be shouted about because it lets people know what you're up to. It advertises where you are in the process. It lets people know when they can reach out to you potentially off the back of a fundraising announcement or off the back of some trade press articles that we put out. People would reach out to say, let's have a coffee to chat about maybe working together or something. It goes back to the things we were talking about before. Stealth. I hate it.
Yeah.
I think it's a terrible way to run a business unless you've cracked fusion energy reactors technology.
And not yet IP'd it, fine.
Yeah, exactly. Then I don't think there's any reason not to do it. I think you gain more by talking to people and announcing that you're doing certain things.
Yeah.
Not.
Yeah, I think the only exception to that rule is, as you say, if you've got like a genuine technological innovation that needs to be IP'd, but even then, a lot of it you can talk about before you say, yes, and this is how we do it.
But if you're just trying to help first-time buyers or trying to make sex better for women, then, doesn't matter. Get out there.
Final question, very quick. Your proudest moment?
I guess what am I proudest of? We went into a highly regulated, culturally inward-looking industry that does not want to be as tough enough as it is.
Yeah.
A highly regulated industry like mortgages.
It's hard.
There are lots of great people within the industry. I still talk to some of them, some advisors or people within the industry, but there is this strain of just like, we don't like new things, like kind of thing. I think going into an industry like that and be willing to try to solve a problem that tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people experience, even though people were putting up barriers to us, that's something I'm proud of.
I love it. Both of you, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having us. It was so fun.
Beautiful.
Thank you for listening. Before you go, please do take a minute to follow so you never miss another episode. We have some incredible founders coming up. And I always love to hear what resonates with listeners. So do drop us a direct message on Instagram @NotMyFirstGuest with any moments that meant something to you, ideas for future episodes, or your own entrepreneurial stories you want to share. Until next time, happy startupping.